Santa Barbara will not be seen today. Another World will be seen at its regular time. And Days of Our Lives will air at 2 o'clock instead of 12 noon. Now stay tuned for a Channel 4 News special report. Live coverage of the opening of the Reagan Library. Here are Jess Marlowe and Colleen Williams.
Good morning. You're looking at a live picture of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley. This is Dedication Day. Dozens of dignitaries have gathered here for this historic occasion.
Of course, among the notables down there in the crowd, former President Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan, but also here are 3 other former presidents, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, and Jimmy Carter. Also, President Bush is here to help his former boss dedicate this facility.
Also present today, former First Lady, Lady Bird Johnson, among the honored guests, as are family members of presidents dating back to Franklin Roosevelt.
Altogether, we're expecting about 4,500 guests today for the library dedication, which will get underway in just a few minutes. Again, this is a live picture from Simi Valley. Of course, because of the tight security out there today, it is impossible to show you everything inside of the library. But we do have some pictures that were taken earlier that will give you an idea of what you're about to see, or what you will see if you go up there to take a look at it. The library building itself is huge. It's about 153,000 square feet. And this area right here is called the Reading and Research Room, one of more than a dozen exhibits that you will see. Our Linda Douglas is standing by live out there. This is something you won't see, actually, if you go up there. Some of the boxed material. There'll be about 47 million pages of documents. Some of these things haven't even been uncrated yet. 75,000 gifts will be on display up there, things that were given to Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy during their 8 years in the White House. Of course, many of the gifts will have a Western theme because that's something that the former president and First Lady really enjoyed. And there'll be things from the beginning of his life when he was in Hollywood, as you can see, with Nancy Davis at the time.
Linda Douglas is also out there taking a look at the situation. She'll be reporting to us throughout this program. Let's go to her now. Linda?
Well, Jess and Colleen, it is the perfect Southern California day out in the old western hills. As you can see, it is very windy, but the weather is absolutely spectacular, warm and clear. This library is located in a place that epitomizes sort of the life of Ronald Reagan. It is the rolling, dusty hills of Simi Valley. It is the home of a former Hollywood stuntman. There were many westerns filmed on these hills, and of course, as you know, Ronald Reagan lived on his ranch and performed the role of a cowboy in some of the westerns. So it sort of epitomizes his view of California and the way that he grew up in the movies, and also then rose from humble origins to become President of the United States. There is a very big crowd here, and the reason this is beginning a little bit late is because there is tremendous security, as you can imagine, with 5 living presidents here at one time. The security people have been clearing the 4,000 guests since very early this morning. What you will see in just a little while is a procession of family members representing all of the modern presidents of the United States. You will see first ladies and other dignitaries. There are many members of the former Reagan cabinet here as well. Some of those, of course, serve on the board of the Reagan Library. Let's talk a little bit about what the Reagan Library is and how it came to be. It is a privately financed endeavor. About $60 million worth of private funds raised, the most expensive library ever, raised through an ongoing fundraising campaign by many of the Ronald Reagan supporters and friends from over the years. It will, however, be operated by the taxpayers. It will be about $1.5 million a year to run the Ronald Reagan Library, which will eventually house about 55 million pages of presidential documents. Those documents will be stored 3 stories underground in a very secure environment in concrete and steel bunkers in acid-proof boxes. Much of the material that is inside of those documents will not be seen by the public until after the year 2001. About 6 million pages of the documents will be available right away, but a lot of that material is going to remain classified. So that is just a glimpse of what is at stake here. That is the entire history of the Ronald Reagan presidency. And we'll be telling you a lot more, but let's go back to you all for now.
All right, Linda, we're about 5 minutes behind schedule, we understand, because the presidents are currently touring the library, and that is, of course, a private tour. Each has his own. Undoubtedly, there'll be some comparisons made, but this is the first time in history that former presidents and a sitting president have gathered together for the dedication of one of the presidential libraries. Former President Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy greeted their special guests personally as they arrived for the dedication of the Reagan Library. Among the first to arrive, former President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind. President Carter had just arrived back in this country from monitoring the elections in Zambia. Former President Gerald Ford arrived with his wife Betty. They were warmly greeted by the Reagans. And a few minutes later, the president who preceded Gerald Ford and the only one to ever resign his office, Richard Nixon, arrived with his wife Pat to shake hands with the Reagans. Representing her late husband was Lady Bird Johnson, the widow of President Lyndon Johnson. Kisses on the cheek from Ronald Reagan. She was followed by Governor Wilson and his wife, who were also warmly greeted by the Reagans. Governor Wilson will be the master of ceremonies for this event. At this point, the Reagans accompanied the Wilsons onto the library grounds to get ready for today's ceremony.
Interesting to note that of the 10 presidential libraries, 2 of them in our area. The one in Simi Valley and, of course, the Richard Nixon Library is in Yorba Linda, opened not too long ago. Right now, Linda Douglas is back out at the scene. Let's go out to her for the latest. Linda?
Well, this presidential library, as all the presidential libraries, is really supposed to be more of a celebration of Ronald Reagan's presidency. Of course, there will be the historic material to form an accurate picture of that presidency by historians, but the Reagan Museum certainly is designed to form a very positive picture of the presidency of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was really sort of the quintessential 20th century politician. He sort of brought together all of the forces of the 20th century, and he was very appealing to a country that grew up believing in happy endings. Ronald Reagan's life was kind of the American dream come true. He was a man who rose to power from very humble origins, and he was a character who was built from hard times and a mother's love. Like most Americans in the early 1900s, Ronald Reagan grew up in a small country town, Dixon, Illinois, right in the heartland. He lived modestly, but watched his family become poor as the country sank into a depression and his father sought solace in alcohol.
Looking back, I know that we lived in poverty or pretty close to it all the time. But we didn't know that at the time.
But Reagan's mother believed her son had great gifts. She doted on him as he became a star football player and class president. Reagan talked his way into a radio sportscasting job where he became known as Dutch Reagan. Filled with confidence, he went to Hollywood, and the rest is, well...
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? Here in
The image Reagan created on the screen lasted his lifetime. His character was usually a good guy who was tough and moral.
You wanted law and order in this town. You've got it.
Reagan was considered a B-movie actor, rarely playing the lead. His most famous role was as Notre Dame football coach George Gipp. Reagan often calls himself the Gipper.
Ask him to go in there with all they've got. Win just one for the Gipper.
Once, Reagan was praised as a serious actor, playing the role of a man whose legs were amputated.
Where's the rest of me?
But he was better remembered for lighter roles, like Bedtime for Bonzo, in which his co-star was a chimpanzee. In 1954, filming Hellcats of the Navy, he met a co-star who would change his life, Nancy Davis, now Nancy Reagan. So much of Reagan's Hollywood career led to his ultimate career as a public official. Not only the character that he played in the movies, but he was also the president of the Screen Actors Guild. And in that role, he testified before Congress in the early 1950s as they were, the McCarthy hearings were investigating the presence of communists throughout the country. It was a period of high paranoia here in the country. Ronald Reagan, as president of the Screen Actors Guild, testified that there were communists inside the Screen Actors Guild and was roundly criticized by his fellow actors for doing that. But Ronald Reagan also said at the time that the American democracy was strong enough to withstand all points of view. He was a Democrat in those days, a Roosevelt Democrat. He later became a Republican, influenced in large part by Nancy Reagan's father, a very conservative Republican doctor in Phoenix. That probably had more of an effect on Ronald Reagan's politics than any of the other events that preceded it, Jess and Colleen.
Linda, were you at all surprised this morning by the Los Angeles Times poll that indicates that most Americans now consider President Reagan to have been little more than an average president? quite a decline from the high ratings he had at the end of his term.
Well, Jess, I wasn't surprised for a couple of reasons. Number one, inevitably, all presidents' images change as history passes by, and right now I think the issue that is on most people's minds is the economy. Finally, after a decade, they have become aware of the looming budget deficit, which could grow to, some say, $400 billion. The Democrats have been hammering away on the theme that it was the Republican tax cut and defense buildup that led to that deficit. Americans are beginning to believe that the deficit has contributed to their declining economic fortune, so I think it was inevitable that Ronald Reagan's image would pale. Also, he's been out of the public eye, and one of his great strengths was his ability to continue to improve his own image by virtue of the power of his charm and personality and distinct political message. And as time has gone by, that presence, of course, has faded in the public eye, and I think that would certainly tarnish his image in retrospect.
Linda, we see a lot going on beyond you in the background. We know that this opens to the community. The library itself opens tomorrow, then to Ventura County on Wednesday, or actually the rest of the public. How do you get an invite to this? Who are the 4,500 people out there today?
Well, interesting, Colleen, in addition to the fact that the former Reagan office people who participated in the Reagan administration were invited, about 1,300 to 1,400 of these people are simply local elected officials from this community. The community has been extremely supportive of the Reagan Library. There was talk initially of locating it on the Stanford campus near the conservative think tank, the Hoover Institute, but the Stanford campus didn't want the Reagan Library here, and so Reagan had to find 100 acres of land in an area where the people in the surrounding community would not complain about the traffic and about the political presence here. And the library was, in fact, welcomed here in Simi Valley by all the communities in Ventura and Los Angeles counties. So those are the people that you see here in the audience. I'm not sure if you can, well, I guess you can sort of see them behind me. Yeah. Many of them just elected officials. Also, of course, some members of Congress and members of the Senate as well.
That is a site where it clearly is not going to disrupt traffic too much except on Dedication Day, but looking at it, Linda, it is also not all that imposing. If anybody expected Ronald Reagan's presidential library to be very big and glitzy, it is anything but that. It seems to me it's, except for its size, the largest of all the presidential libraries, it seems to me that it's rather modest.
Well, it's very California. It's a Spanish style, and of course the Spanish style, the true Spanish style, is designed to blend in with the hillside and to be as unobtrusive as possible. I think it was very important to the Reagans that it be as truly California in its architecture as possible. I think certainly Nancy Reagan was very concerned that it be as tasteful as possible. One of the things, by the way, that I was meaning to mention to you after taking a look at Ronald Reagan's movie career is that the movie career itself will be on display here at the library in the museum. There are some 80,000 feet of motion picture footage that will be stored here. Ronald Reagan revered in many ways his career as a movie actor as much as he did his role as the President of the United States.
He still does love movies. It's still one of his major preoccupations is watching movies, particularly older movies.
Well, in fact, Nancy Reagan gave a tour of the miniature of the White House that will be contained inside the museum here. And pointed out to the children who saw it that the Reagans liked to eat dinner on TV trays sometimes when they were in the White House, just sort of the all-American family, as she said. I think the events are about to begin, but it's unclear. That band has been striking up what sounded like beginning notes for some time. Although I do hear America the Beautiful, Jess, so I
they have been touring the library. The president and his ex-presidents have been touring the library, and that undoubtedly will take some time, too. So we have been delayed a few minutes, but the crowd is still being entertained.
It's a beautiful day out there, except for the wind blowing through the area, and I think you can expect that most days out in that area. Let's talk a little bit about what Linda mentioned, the miniature, the replica of the White House itself. We understand it has the Oval Office, it has television monitors, and telephones at work.
Here come the guests now who are beginning to arrive, so this ceremony is about to get underway. These are among the many invited guests. There's Lord Cook.
The chairman of the Board of Trustees.
What we are seeing here now, Jess, are the various members of the Board of Trustees. They are mostly old friends of the Reagans and some former cabinet members. former Attorney General Ed Meese, former Interior Secretary William Clark. You know, there's been some controversy about that. The conservative former cabinet members have been asked now to leave the Board of Trustees to make room for others. Nancy Reagan's been accused of
Reagan children.
having engineered that. Michael Reagan is there.
Right. Maureen ahead of him.
Ron Reagan.
Colin Powell.
So the widow of former Attorney General William French Smith, also apparently she is on the board too.
What we're going to see are representatives.
Here we
here
are.
are the first ladies.
Ms. Maureen Reagan and her husband, Mr. Dennis Revel.
Mrs. Reagan, Mrs. Carter,
Mr. Michael Reagan and his wife.
Mrs. Bush,
Lady Bird
Mrs.
Johnson.
Reagan, Rosalind Carter, Betty Ford, Pat Nixon, Lady Bird Johnson. They are walking in the fountain area behind the stage.
Mrs. Jihan Sadat, the senior pastor of the Bel Air Presbyterian Church. The Reverend
That's quite a sight.
It is indeed. 6 first ladies.
Spanning 3 decades of politics in the U.S.
Of course, Nancy Reagan is wearing her trademark red dress. Mrs. Reagan has been, as you can imagine, intimately involved in every small detail, not only of the library itself, but of the ceremony, which is costing about $500,000, the ceremony that we are going to be witnessing today, again, all paid for by private donations. The fundraising, by the way, continues. There's about $11 million worth of construction loan money still to be paid off, and so behind me here, you can't really see them, but there is a section that is designated simply for the so-called heavy hitters, people who've given $50,000 or more to the library construction project. Their names, by the way, are engraved in stone here at the library. Those are the people who have made the library possible.
Well, in
And
fact,
here we see the first ladies again.
the land was also donated too.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Quite a sight out there. We're still awaiting the arrival of the presidents. First ladies have now arrived. It's quite a spectacle.
Why don't we go back out to the live pictures there, and here
Mrs. Rosalind Carter,
they are being
Mrs.
introduced
Betty
and
Ford,
arriving on the podium.
Mrs. Pat Nixon, and Mrs. Lady Bird Johnson.
They are walking out under the arches that lead to the courtyard of the library and are moving now up to the back part of the stage, receiving, of course, a standing ovation.
This is a very rare public appearance for Mrs. Nixon. She rarely gets out.
Yes, that's very true, Jess. She has not been well, although she is certainly looking well today. And that is Mrs. Nixon and Lady Bird Johnson, who still lives in Texas.
They all look terrific. Lady Bird Johnson is now 78 years old. They must be recalling the dedication of the libraries to their husbands as well.
Well, in fact, that's exactly right. Each of these presidents has his own library. I guess it has become the tradition of all presidents to immediately create a library. This is the last one, though, that will be maintained by the taxpayers. Congress has passed a law saying that in the future, not only will the construction of the library be paid for with private funds, but the operation of the library will as well. Right now, of course, Richard Nixon's is the only one that is operated by the private trust.
Does that not also, Linda, give the former president greater control over what happens to the archives there?
Well, that's exactly right. Richard Nixon has been criticized by many for not including every detail of Watergate and for not having displayed it prominently inside of his library. Once Ronald Reagan hands the keys over to the National Archivist, which he will do at the end of this ceremony, he essentially turns the operation of this library over to the United States government and to the people. And there will be greater accuracy demanded. Now here we have
There's
the
the shot.
presidents. Historic moment.
Indeed, we have never before, of course, had 5 living American presidents.
They are just in the courtyard area, walking by the fountain and moving toward the archway in this traditional Spanish design that will then take them up to the back of the stage.
The Closest we come to that was the dedication of the Richard Nixon Library in Yorba Linda. 4 presidents at that point in time. Missing at that point was Jimmy Carter. And as you can see, they are arranged in order of their presidency.
Jimmy Carter, as you mentioned before, having just flown in from Zambia, where he was monitoring the first free democratic elections in that country. One of the many globe-hopping activities that the former president has been involved in. He had initially, I think, tried to beg off of this appearance by saying that he had to monitor those elections in Zambia, but then was prevailed upon to join the other presidents.
Prevailed upon by Lord Cook, among others, who provided the Arco jet to bring him back from Zambia.
That's exactly right.
Pretty good prevailing. They all look terrific. Now, we will be hearing from each of those presidents. Governor Wilson is the master of ceremonies. He'll be introducing each of them, and each of them will present a short speech.
Before we get to the governor, however, we will be hearing from Charlton Heston, who fits right in with that group.
Linda, you were about to say?
I was just going to say it's going to be interesting to hear from Jimmy Carter, because we really haven't heard much from the only Democratic president this country has had in the last 23 years. We haven't heard from him in connection with all the other presidents. And of course, Jimmy Carter just suffered a humiliating defeat in his own mind at the hands of Ronald Reagan, which produced one of the most profound ideological shifts in this country's history. It's been said that it has taken him many years to sort of recover from that, though now he really has spent all of his time in public service, of course, building shelters for the homeless, trying to improve the quality of life in Atlanta. His is the one library that is affiliated with a university. So it is said to be a fairly productive library in terms of research for academics who are interested in exploring his presidency. Several of the others are not affiliated with universities, and that's said to be something of a handicap in trying to produce this sort of historical record that one hopes will come out of these presidential libraries.
Indeed, based strictly on the sheer volume of papers, the Ronald Reagan Library is going to be a real source of inspiration for political scholars for years to come, because there's so much there.
Ronald Reagan, in fact, has asked the historians who are assembling the papers for his library to see if they can find any so-called smoking gun in the Iran-Contra scandal. He actually asked that himself, and apparently none has been located thus far. They are getting ready to approach the stage now, the 5 presidents. George Bush will pay tribute to Ronald Reagan as his mentor, and will praise Ronald Reagan as having brought an end to communism in the world.
Hail to the chief being heard now.
Ruffles and flourishes. Well, the presidents now are getting ready to take their seats. As you said, we're going to be hearing now from Charlton Heston, of course, one of the best-known Republican Hollywood celebrities in the country.
Over the past 20-some years, on a January day at high noon in the west front of the Capitol, each of these 5 men has taken part in an event unique in the world. Without force or coercion, with neither the threat of military violence nor parliamentary abrasion, each in his turn has accepted in peaceful transfer the most awesome power and influence ever put in the hand of a single human being. The man who holds this power, in the fullness of time, passes it on in civil and congenial obedience to the custom of 2 centuries. Each of these men inherited more than just a constitutional legacy. Each will be forever wrapped in legend and myth. Each has carried a burden of responsibility that has no known counterpart in the world. Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush are the lineal descendants of Washington and Adams, Jefferson and Jackson, Lincoln, Wilson, Roosevelt. Through them, they are linked to the very birth year of our republic. The president. What do we pray for him? What do we wish from him? What can he pledge to us? What can we say or do to help him? It's been said that the creation of the United States is the greatest political act of mankind. How did that happen? What brought about that extraordinary confluence of time, place, circumstance, the concerted effort of a people in arms and a few great men? How did the line continue through 2 centuries to these 5 who stand here with us, having borne, still bearing, the awesome weight of the Republic? Why has it worked so long and so well? Was it our system? Surely that's part of it. The American dream, which is not success, but freedom. It's not that only, though. Other countries have cherished that dream and lost it. Well, what then? Are we smarter? Is it luck? Are we more determined? Is it the grace of God? I think it's in part the land itself, that broad swell of continent between those shining seas. From the very beginning, before we were Americans as a people, we were captivated by the land. We belonged to the land before the land was ours, Carl Sandburg wrote. American writers have been exploring this country and its history from the beginning. Reading what some of them have written over all these years, I was struck by how readily fragments, sentences of what they wrote fell almost by themselves into one paragraph. They seemed to speak with one voice. Here are the words of 7 men: Martin Luther King, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Tom Paine, Samuel Eliot Morrison, William Faulkner, Thomas Wolfe, and Abraham Lincoln, about America and Americans. I have a dream. I refuse to accept the end of man. I believe he will endure. He will prevail. Man is immortal, not because alone among God's creatures he has a voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit, capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. About America and Americans, this is particularly true. It's a fabulous country, the only fabulous country where miracles not only happen, they happen all the time. As a nation, we have, perhaps uniquely, a special willingness of the heart, a blithe fearlessness, a simple yearning for righteousness and justice that ignited in our revolution a flame of freedom that cannot be stamped out. That is the living, fruitful spirit of this country. These are the times that try men's souls. The sunshine patriot and the summer soldier will in this crisis shrink from service. But he who stands and bears it now will earn the thanks of man and woman. We must bind up the nation's wounds with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us finish the work we are in.
The chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, Mr. Lodcook.
He's also the chief executive officer of ARCO.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Isn't this a wonderful occasion? It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the dedication of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. This is a great day for Ronald and Nancy Reagan. The library we are dedicating celebrates and pays tribute to the Reagan years in Washington and to their achievements on behalf of the people of the United States. This is also an historic occasion by any standards. Adlai Stevenson once said, "In America, any boy may become president, and I suppose it's just one of the risks he takes." On stage this morning are 5 men who have run that risk and have come through the experience with great distinction. Their presence makes this a unique event, the largest gathering of American presidents and presidential families ever assembled. Gentlemen, your presence makes clear once again how blessed our country has been in its presidents. From the first to the 41st, from George Washington to George Bush. Therefore, it is entirely appropriate to begin today's ceremonies by asking for God's blessing. At this time, I would ask the Reverend Don Mumaw, a close personal friend of the Reagans, to deliver the invocation. Reverend Mumaw.
Reverend Mumaw has been Ronald Reagan's pastor throughout his adult life, Bel Air Presbyterian
Let us all
Church.
unite in prayer together. Let us rise. We invoke, O God, your blessing on this service of dedication, and we implore your good grace upon this Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. May all who come here to visit or to study be guided to a deeper appreciation of Mr. Reagan and his contribution to a better and a stronger America. We thank you, our Father, for Mr. and Mrs. Reagan and the principles which have guided them and the faith which has kept them true, compassionate, and just. As we are this day surrounded by many dignitaries and honored world leaders, oh God, we recognize that you are the mighty one, and we pray that you will visit us this day and empower us anew with your spirit of joy, of hope, and of compassion. In the name of our Lord and Savior we pray. Amen. God bless you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Reverend. We will now have the presentation of the colors by the Joint Armed Services Color Guard. That will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag, led by General Colin Powell. Following the pledge, Sergeant First Class Alvy Powell of the U.S. Army Corps will sing the national anthem.
This ceremony is symbolic of one of the most remembered aspects of the Reagan presidency, and that was the revival of patriotism in the country. When Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980, the country was suffering sort of a crisis of its national pride because of the seizure of the American hostages in Iran and the declining economy. Ronald Reagan ran a campaign that was filled with all kinds of patriotic images, and his presidency was that way as well. And those images have certainly remained in the country. Here's Colin Powell.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag and to our beloved nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
By the
Then the Reverend Mr. Mumal talked about the foreign dignitaries who are there, and indeed Nicaragua's President Violeta Chamorro and Canada's Brian Mulroney were supposed to have been there, but I think at the last moment were not able to make it, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. But we do certainly have Mrs. Sadat here, the widow of slain Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Of course, Sadat was a great friend of the United States, and Jimmy Carter in particular took some pride in having assembled or participated in assembling the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And Mrs. Sadat has stayed close to all of the American presidents. The band is now marching away. The presidents look remarkably well. We have some aging gentlemen on that stage. Ronald Reagan is 80. Presidents Nixon and Ford are 78. And then Jimmy Carter and George Bush are 67.
These men and women have done an outstanding job. They've done the fundraising, the planning, and all.
They're introducing now the Board of Trustees. This, again, is a group that is made up of people who are very close to the Reagan family. I think I mentioned to you earlier that there is some controversy about the fact that the conservative advisors to Ronald Reagan, Attorney General Ed Meese, Interior Secretary William Clark, Domestic Policy Advisor Martin Anderson, have been asked to leave the board. Ronald Reagan's former press secretary, Lynn Nopziger, accused Nancy Reagan of removing the ideologues from the board because, according to Lynn Nopziger, the former press secretary, she wanted to be more surrounded by beautiful people. There's never been a wonderful relationship between the former First Lady and the former press secretary. Here's the governor, Pete Wilson.
Thank you very much, Lod. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us today a very special guest, a friend of America, and a strong voice for world peace. Ladies and gentlemen, let us show our appreciation for the former First Lady of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Mrs. Anwar Sadat. We are also honored to have with us so many distinguished members of America's first families. And of course, we have a remarkable gathering of First Ladies of the United States. One of them inspired us to restore the natural beauty, not only of her beloved Texas, but of all America, First Lady, Lady Bird Johnson. Another First Lady represented America on 5 continents and in 22 nations with grace, dignity, and charm. Let us show our affection and esteem for First Lady Pat Nixon. The next First Lady reached out to disabled children and endeared herself to America with her courage and her candor. Ladies and gentlemen, First Lady Betty Ford. Next came a First Lady who eagerly sought improvements in social care at home and in human rights abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, First Lady Rosalind Carter. And now there is in the White House a very special lady who has worked hard and well to promote literacy and who at Wellesley displayed humor and gentle wisdom in her own wonderful way with words. The First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Barbara Bush. And finally, there is the First Lady who shares this dedication day with her husband. In 1985, at an elementary school in Oakland, California, a child asked Nancy Reagan, "What do you do if someone offers you drugs?" Mrs. Reagan replied, "Just say no." Nancy Reagan gave us a simple and powerful prescription that changed young attitudes and saved young lives. She brought grace and elegance to the White House. Ladies and gentlemen, let us show our affection, appreciation, and admiration for Nancy Reagan. We are here today to open a new center dedicated to scholarship and to the free debate of public policy. But we are also here to honor a great man and to celebrate a great life, an American life, the life of Ronald Reagan, our 40th president. This deserved tribute has assembled, for the first time in our nation's history, 5 Americans who have served in the highest office in the land. 4 presidents of the United States come together to honor one. Last year, we gathered at another presidential library to honor another great post-war president from California. Richard Nixon came to office determined to reassert America's leadership in the world. In 2 words, Mr. President, you succeeded. At the height of the Cold War, you saw and took an opportunity to open the door to change. And now the process of change is sweeping the world. Yesterday, Budapest and Moscow. Tomorrow, Beijing and Havana. As a young vice president, Richard Nixon had a long and an extraordinary and evidently memorable conversation with Sir Winston Churchill. The former prime minister and Nobel Prize-winning author must have left a deep impression, because Richard Nixon has become himself a prolific, incisive, and popular author. The books and articles, the keen analysis continue to flow from his pen. And President Nixon still shapes the debate. Chances are he'll get the last word. It is my honor to introduce President Richard Nixon.
Governor Wilson, distinguished guests, may I first express my appreciation to the very gracious words that Governor Wilson has spoken of me, of my colleagues who have served as president, and of the first ladies. And Pat and I want you to know, feel very honored that we can join all of you in paying tribute to 2 people whose friendship we have cherished for over 30 years, Ronald and Nancy Reagan. We have heard a great deal about the fact that this is an historic occasion because for the first time we have 5 presidents and 6 first ladies in attendance. But speaking as a politician, I think you should know that I'm much more impressed by the fact that there are 4 people here who served and were elected as governors of their particular states. Over the past 45 years, I have run for the House, I've been elected to the House, I've been elected to the Senate, I've been elected as vice president. I've been elected as president. I never made it for governor. But by losing in 1962, I made it possible for Ronald Reagan to be elected governor in 1966. This magnificent library is a deserved tribute to Ronald Reagan and to Nancy Reagan. But as far as Ronald Reagan's legacy is concerned, he does not need a building to make it live for all of us. Even without a building, we always will remember that Ronald Reagan was the president who restored America's military might, the military might that made it possible for George Bush to implement his brilliant strategy for victory in the Gulf War. But great as that victory was, Ronald Reagan will be remembered for something even more important. Throughout his career, he has been one who had profound beliefs, who had the courage to fight for those beliefs, and who had the eloquence to inspire his fellow Americans to support those beliefs. He believed in the simple things. He believed in freedom and democracy. He believed that America was on the right side of history, standing with the forces of good against the forces of evil in the world. And some have dismissed him, therefore, as an ideologue. But Ronald Reagan has been justified by what has happened. History has justified his leadership and those strong beliefs. Permit me to use a personal example. 32 years ago, when I was in Moscow, the premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, jabbed his finger into my chest and said, "Your grandchildren will live under communism." And I responded, "Your grandchildren will live in freedom." At that time, I was sure he was wrong, but I was not sure I was right. And now we know, thanks in great part to the strong, idealistic leadership of President Ronald Reagan, Khrushchev's grandchildren now live in freedom.
An ovation for former President Nixon.
President Nixon giving Ronald Reagan credit for having ended communism in the world. Interesting to note, by the way, Jess, that Ronald Reagan has run against every one of the presidents on the platform. He even ran against Nixon briefly in 1968.
Thank you, President Nixon. Some Californians become president, but then some presidents become Californians. Our next speaker is a son of Michigan, but Californians proudly claim and admire President Gerald Ford, not only for his leadership as president, but for his tireless leadership in great causes and great charities, from the Boy Scouts of America to the American Cancer Society. And all America owes gratitude to President Ford for the reassurance that he provided to our nation in a moment of uncertainty. He gave us what we needed most: calm, steady leadership, leavened with good humor, qualities he maintained even when struggling with a recalcitrant, at times irresponsible Congress. Come to think of it, that line may apply to all the presidents. But Gerald Ford gave America, in his own words, a time to heal. It is my honor to introduce President Gerald Ford.
For a long time, there was a bitter relationship between President Ford and Mr. Reagan. They ran against each other in 1976, very bitter race.
Mr. President, our distinguished First Ladies, as a young congressman, I well remember listening in rapt attention as General Douglas MacArthur addressed his farewell address to the Congress. He may have been right about old soldiers, but you can be sure that old presidents never just fade away. It's been over a year now since we last met in Yorba Linda to get President Nixon's library off to a very good start. It was a decade ago that both President Reagan and Vice President Bush came to Grand Rapids, Michigan to do the same for mine. I like these reunions. I'm looking forward to the next one. But don't get me wrong. I don't want to attend the George Bush Library dedication any sooner than 6 years, say about 1997. Well, here we are at the 10th and the newest presidential library, which is being dedicated like the others to the American people. Herein, they will find hanging the spurs that Ronald Reagan won, not just one pair, but several. He didn't stop with 2 successful acting and governor careers. He went on to be elected President of the United States by the 3rd biggest landslide in history. And what will history say of the Reagan presidency? This library contains the records that will document the details for unborn generation of scholars. But you know what they say about history? History is something that never happened, written by those who weren't there. Let me give you my view as one who was there. President Reagan, you will be remembered as a national leader who was able to articulate the highest hopes and deepest beliefs of the American people. You have a great gift for transforming the best instincts into the firmest articles of faith. Our misty memories of the past into bright visions of a better tomorrow. People trust you and believe in you because they feel that you trust and believe in them. And more important, that you trust and believe as they do. Yes, you are rightly called a great communicator. You mastered the art of the television tube as FDR did the radio microphone and Abe Lincoln the stump speech. I was both touched and flattered when you came to Michigan 10 years ago and quoted approvingly of a speech that I delivered in the Old North Church in Boston on the 200th anniversary of Paul Revere's famous ride. I had prayed that Americans 200 years hence might look back and say of our generation, we kept the faith. Freedom flourished. Liberty lived. Today, let me update that with thanksgiving. America kept the faith. Freedom prospered. Liberty lived. The Cold War died. President Reagan, for 8 eventful years, you kept the faith. You stayed the course. President Reagan, very likely, I should say President Bush, very likely, you will be our last commander-in-chief who wore the uniform in World War II, as did all your predecessors, beginning with President Eisenhower. A common policy of peace through strength can be seen running through these years under both Democrats as well as Republicans. The big question, can the future learn from the past Is there a lesson to be learned from the archives of the Cold War in Missouri, Truman, in Kansas, Eisenhower, in Massachusetts, Kennedy, in Texas, Johnson, in Michigan, Ford, in Georgia, Carter, and in California, two in California, where they always do things bigger and better? My answer would be the record shows the United States won the Cold War by staying strong and free. The freedom of our society enabled our adversaries to see our strength. They in their dependency came to see that our freedom was the source of our strength. They came to the conclusion that they could never bury us, that they would really rather become more like us. We welcome this. We should help the process along. But perpetuating peace may be even far more difficult than waging war. Though the Cold War may be over, global competition has only begun. Europe, without an Iron Curtain, may dwarf the economic miracles of devastated Germany and Japan. Russia, in economic and political turmoil, remains an unguided giant. China is stirring restlessly. The so-called third world is pocked with trouble spots. Much is the same, much has changed. What course should the United States set in the years ahead? Our counsel, our advice is unchanged. Keep the faith. Be vigilant. Remain strong. Let freedom flourish. Let liberty live. Stay the course. Stay the course. Stay the course. Thank you, and God be with us till we meet again.
President Gerald Ford, who, of course, of all the presidents up there, served the shortest term, 2.5 years approximately. He stepped in when President Nixon resigned.
Our next speaker brought to the Oval Office an abiding faith in right over might, a deep compassion for the oppressed, and a determination to make human rights America's hallmark all around the world. Recent events in Madrid bring to mind perhaps the greatest achievement of President Jimmy Carter, the Camp David Accord. Earlier, when I recognized Mrs. Sadat, I couldn't help but think that this must be a day of poignant pride for her. Anwar Sadat had the courage to face his former enemies and to extend to them the open hand of friendship and of peace. At different times, Mrs. Sadat, each of our 5 special guests worked with your great husband to forge and sustain that enduring peace. No one had a higher regard for him or a deeper appreciation for the challenge of bringing that peace to the Middle East than our next speaker. It is my honor to introduce President Jimmy Carter.
The Republican representation has 4 times as much time on the program as the Democratic. You all have another advantage over me. At least all of you have met a Democratic president. I've never had that honor yet. I might say, though, referring to President Ford's remarks, that I hope to have that privilege in the future. I won't go by President Ford's schedule exactly, if you don't mind, today. Yesterday morning, Rosa and I left Lusaka in Zambia, flew back, and arrived here late last night so that we could be present at this historic event. On the way, on those long hours on the plane, I thought about the significance of this assembly, unprecedented, of the leaders of our country. What does it mean as compared, for instance, with other nations? We participated in the election in Zambia and saw the vivid demonstration of a desire of people for true freedom and an honest election and real democracy. After 27 years under a state of emergency, led by the same man and the same parties. It was a wonderful occasion to witness that emerging into the democratic fold, side by side now with our great country. A few days before that, we had been in Liberia, a country torn by war, named for freedom itself, founded by former slaves from the United States of America. Their capital named after James Monroe, one of our early presidents. We drove through Monrovia, a hollow shell of a city, reminiscent to me in Roseland of Beirut. We visited there just a few years ago. A country still at war, struggling to achieve a united nation, peace, and a chance, again, for freedom and democracy. In the United States, we have those same kinds of differences, political differences. We have a heterogeneous population, wider dispersed in heritage, beliefs, language than any other on earth. But we have a solid, dependable, stable Constitution under which we all live. And what binds us together best of all is our common commitment to freedom. In the political turmoil of our country, which we see every day, it's always a vivid reminder to me that we're able to discern the continuum of history. Pete Wilson has just mentioned the Middle East. President Harry Truman was the first one who opened up not only the freedom of an independent nation of Israel, but also the succeeding problems that we have all faced. And now I want to congratulate James Baker, sitting in front of us, who's just come back from a wonderful achievement in Madrid. I read the morning paper after we got up this morning, and just glancing down the front page, you see the same kind of stories in the news that were there when I was president. Civil rights, the debate over how to deal to our people, the same kind of human rights in this country that we always express as a need in the foreign nations. Abraham Lincoln was the one who opened up this panorama of opportunity for us, and it goes down to the present day. Environmental issues are with us. I was a president who was very proud of the fact that under Richard M. Nixon, we saw the Congress and him work together to achieve the Environmental Protection Agency, pure air and water legislation, the Council of Environmental Quality. We still struggle together, Democrats and Republicans alike, on basic issues that affect our country, the insurance of military strength. All of us who've been in that office know that to plan, design, test, and produce a weapon system, as those used recently in the Gulf, it takes several presidential administrations to bring those dreams into reality, and that our fighting men and women have a chance to prevail. Let me point out that we still have some unanswered questions. How to provide good health care for all our people, homes for those who don't have a place to dwell, better education for our children. These are the kind of things that make a common tie among all us presidents who have served. I would say parenthetically that one of the things that brings former presidents closest together is the extremely onerous and burdensome task of begging for enough money to build a presidential library from private sources, not from the government, and then turn it over to the federal government in perpetuity as a repository for the records of our great nation. Under President Ronald Reagan, our nation stood strong and resolute and made possible the beginning of the end of the Cold War. This has led to a new opportunity for our country to exhibit its greatness, which we accept for granted too often, more clearly to people around the world. In the past, all during my lifetime as an adult, I've known both war and the Second World War period, then also since then the Cold War. That Cold War is now over. And instead of two superpowers constantly struggle one against another everywhere on Earth almost in intense competition, we have one superpower. It's a matter of pride, but it's also a matter of sober realization that the world is now looking to us to exhibit our greatness. There are characteristics that do not change that measure our nation's greatness. An adherence to truth, to justice, to freedom, and to human rights. All can see that this is a goal for us to strive to achieve. The men behind me have helped make it possible for us to look to the future when the greatness of our nation will be measured not by achievements at war, but by the true and unchallenged champion of peace on earth.
Linda, you spoke of the fact that these presidents have all at one time or another run against Ronald Reagan, but they're all showing a good deal of grace today, and that's obviously appropriate for the occasion. Tributes from Jimmy Carter, the lone Democrat there.
This day has brought together very different leaders with vastly different styles of leadership. These five men have confronted each other over policy, and on occasion, they have confronted each other on the ballot. Together, they represent years of history which span what another president, John F. Kennedy, predicted would be a long twilight struggle, the Cold War. And yet today, we can walk the grounds of this presidential library and see a 6,000-pound block of what was once the Berlin Wall. We can thank God that Cold War is over and that the victors were democracy, freedom, and human hope. But that Cold War would never have been won if America's leaders had been weak or uncertain. American presidents, whatever their differences, created an American brand of leadership that backed our ideals with resolve and matched human rights with human will. And so the Cold War was won because American presidents were strong and clear in America's resolve to defend democracy. It is especially appropriate that our five presidents gather at the Reagan Library. After all, Ronald Reagan is not someone to ponder gloomily why democracies might perish. No, he is the quintessential American optimist. He knew freedom would triumph in the end. Indeed, he insisted upon it. But freedom is not free. It must be repurchased in each new generation. And that triumph continues today because of the steady, determined, and courageous leadership of President George Bush. President Bush has given not just America, but all the world, unflinching and unflagging leadership in the defense of free nations. And now he has focused that same leadership upon a stubborn Congress. demanding that it defend free enterprise and free America to regain its economic strength. Let me make one last observation before the President speaks. For much of his spectacular career, George Bush has served or advised 3 of his predecessors, and of course he was a strong and constant partner to today's honoree, President Ronald Reagan. Now, George Bush has been our Commander-in-Chief for almost 3 years. As you can see, Mr. President, loyalty begets loyalty. But most of all, loyalty is born of admiration. It must be earned. And ours is an admiration for our President's integrity and strength, admiration for the courage and grit demanded to exercise world leadership, admiration for the kind of extraordinary leader that George Bush has been and continues to be. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the President of the United States, George Bush.
President Bush, like the other presidents, is expected to praise Ronald Reagan's foreign policy accomplishments. You don't hear much talk about the economy, which is probably frustrating for Mr. Reagan, who believes he was responsible for the greatest peacetime expansion in history. Mr. President.
On this 11th anniversary of your election as president, my special greeting, of course, to your fellow Californians, President and Mrs. Nixon, also President and Mrs. Ford, President and Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Johnson, you're so sweet to be here. Members of the Reagan, Kennedy, Johnson, and Roosevelt families. As I listened to these talks, I got to thinking, wouldn't Fred Travalena, Rich Little, Dana Carvey have a wonderful time here today? And I was so moved by Chuck Heston's opening comments, and Lod Cook, congratulations, sir. Once again, you've stepped up and done a superb job. Reverend Don Mumaw, thank you, sir, for the invocation, and of course, being with my trusted advisor, military leader Colin Powell, is a treat. And then deja vu, as Sergeant Alvy Powell sang the Star-Spangled Banner. He did that at my inauguration, and I'll never forget it. Ambassador Annenberg and all who work so hard on this library, our profound thanks to you. This marks an historic occasion. For the first time, 5 presidents and 6 first ladies, past and present, have gathered together in the same locale. The 4 former presidents, dedicated public servants, and these wonderful first ladies, each has played a significant part in the American story. We begin with the 37th President, Richard Nixon, and the woman we know and love as Pat. Mr. President, you were an innovator at home, a peacemaker, groundbreaker abroad. We'll never forget it. Here, too, our Betty Ford and America's 38th President, Gerald Ford. To this son of Michigan, we say, we are very grateful for your quiet strength of character, your vigor, and your just plain innate decency. And next, we thank the 39th President, Jimmy Carter, and his wife, Rosalind. America applauds your lifelong commitment, sir, to peace, to human rights, to helping others. And it was most gracious of you to make such an extra effort to be here today. And I feel very badly that you haven't met a Democratic president yet, but please don't do anything about that. And Lady Bird, Mrs. Johnson, we salute you for your dedication to our natural beauty, and also for your love of family that shines through every single day. Today we're here to honor an American life, which is the title of his autobiography. We also honor an American original. Ronald Reagan was born on February 6th, but his heart is the 4th of July. And with his disarming sense of humor, President Reagan was something refreshingly different in Washington. A politician who was funny on purpose. And he also was, though, a visionary, a crusader, a prophet in his time. He was a political prophet, leading the tide toward conservatism. He was also a Main Street prophet. He understood that America is great because of what we are, not what we have. And politics can be cruel, can be mean and ugly and uncivil. And unfailingly, Ronald Reagan was strong and gentle, and he ennobled public service. He embodied the American character. He came from the heart of America geographically and culturally. Not even a bullet from the gun of a would-be assassin could stay his spirit. Remember the terrible day in March of '81, he looked at the doctors in the emergency room and said, "I hope you're all Republicans." Well, Republicans or Democrats, his courage and humor made us all proud to be Americans. And for 8 years, I was very proud to be his vice president. And I saw a man who was thoughtful, sentimental, sending money to strangers who touched him, writing letters on yellow legal paper and asking that they be retyped because he wanted to make it easier for the recipients to read. As president, Ronald Reagan was unmoved by the vagaries of intellectual fashion. He treasured values that last, values that endure. And I speak of patriotism and civility and generosity and kindness, values etched in the American character. Once asked who he admired most in history, he simply responded, "The man from Galilee." Mr. President, your faith is what is true and good, and that helped reaffirm our faith in the United States of America. Ronald Reagan believed in returning power to the people, and so he helped the private sector create more than 16 million jobs. He sought to enlarge opportunity, not government. So he lowered taxes and spending and cut inflation and helped create the longest peacetime boom in American history. How ironic that the oldest president of the United States would prove as young as the American spirit. Here as in Washington, he was aided by the true love of his life. As First Lady, Nancy championed the Foster's Grandparents Program, heightened breast cancer awareness. She refurbished the White House with the dignity that is her legacy. She sure left us a nice, cozy place to live, I might say. And to the scourge of drugs, she urged America's children to just say no. And Nancy, for these things and many more, all Americans salute you. And finally, the president was a global prophet. Today we've heard this, but the world is safer because he believed that we who are free to live our dreams have a duty to support those who dream of living free. He predicted that communism would land in the dustbin of history, and history proved him right. And he knew that when it comes to national defense, finishing second means finishing last. And so he practiced what he preached, supporting a strong military and pioneering the Strategic Defense Initiative. And his vision paid off. And his vision paid off for every American in the sea and sands of the Gulf, and America thanks him for that too. Mr. President, history will record the 1980s were not only among America's finest hours, they became perhaps democracy's finest era. Our friend the Iron Lady, as usual, said it best. I speak of Margaret Thatcher, your fellow liegeman of liberty. Recently, she spoke of how great leaders are summed up in a sentence. Here's the quote. Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. He had little help, at least that's what he tells me. And looking here at men and women from presidencies of the last 3 decades, it occurs to me that help came largely from the American people and you. And here's part of what the historians will say of Ronald Reagan. He was the great communicator and also the great liberator. From Normandy to Moscow, from Berlin to the Oval Office, no leader since Churchill used words so effectively to help freedom unchain our world. You were prophet and president, and I want to thank you for your many, many kindnesses to Barbara and to me. You love this country, you know America, and you have blessed America as few men ever have. And now it is my distinct privilege and honor to introduce the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Paying real tribute to the 40th President of the United States, being introduced by the 41st.
80-year-old Ronald Reagan, according to the LA Times poll, most admired by young people. Young people, the grand majority of them in this country support him still strongly, in spite of waning support among other age groups.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and to all the other distinguished speakers who hold that exalted title. You know, I've been called, as just recently also, a great communicator, but I have to admit it's hard for me to communicate the emotions that crowd in at such a moment and the humility that comes with tributes like those you've heard this morning. The pride I feel as I look out over this audience and see so many old friends for whom this library is a testimonial of love, loyalty, and idealism, to Lod Cook and the members of the Reagan Library Foundation, and to the thousands of donors the world over whose generosity is reflected in the building we dedicate this morning. There are no words to convey adequately the gratitude that both Nancy and I feel for all you have done. And let me also thank President Bush and the former presidents who have joined us today. The exclusive fraternity of presidents has grown. And although we don't get together very often, when we do, well, as you can see, it generates quite a bit of interest. At one time or another, I've run against most of these gentlemen, and they've run against me. And yet here we are, which just goes to show that above personal ideologies and party politics, we stand united as Americans. I am proud and honored that so many of the great presidential families are represented here today. The descendants of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, for whom I cast my first 4 votes, and who has served as a personal inspiration to me as well as millions of Americans. Carolyn and John Kennedy, Jr., who through their strength and courage have so proudly carried forward the flame of their father's legacy. Lady Bird Johnson, whose warmth and strength served as a tremendous source of inspiration to her husband, and whose personal efforts have inspired a whole new generation of Americans to keep America beautiful. She's joined by her daughter, Lucy Johnson Turpin, and Lucy's husband, Eon Turpin. The 5 presidents on this platform span 22 years of challenge and triumph, from the first man on the moon to the last aggressor out of liberated Kuwait. 2.5 decades forever stamped with the style and substance of a grocer's son from Yorba Linda, California, who as a boy heard train whistles in the night and dreamed of traveling to distant places, and who as president would crisscross the globe to build a new and lasting structure of peace, and his lovely wife, Pat, whose splendor and grace has served as an inspiration to every first lady that has followed her. And
an All-American from Michigan by way of Capitol Hill, who has an embodiment of Midwestern decency and honor, steered the ship of state through rough waters and won the affection of Americans everywhere. And his First Lady, Betty, who has been a shining example of personal strength to millions of Americans. A son of the South whose election did more than anything else to restore that great region to its rightful place in the American mainstream, and who devoted himself tirelessly to cleaning the blood of Abraham from the sands of the Middle East, and his partner to the President, Rosalind, who assists him to this day in his important efforts to improve the quality of life in nations around the world. And a Texan imbued with the can-do optimism of that larger-than-life place, who in liberating a small nation half a world away has also freed the United States of America from the crippling legacy of Vietnam, and with us today, America's First Lady, Barbara, whose personal campaign for literacy has opened the minds and hearts of so many Americans. And of course, my Nancy. I don't know how to begin to describe what she means to me, except to say I can't imagine life without her. Would you please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in expressing our gratitude to these great Americans, not just for their presence here today, but for their historic contributions to a world where, to a greater extent than ever before in our century, no one wields a sword and no one drags a chain. Together we gather for a single purpose, to give to the American people in the world a presidential library. There is understandably a great temptation to look back, to remember, to share warm and fond memories, and to reflect on the events which brought us here. And as we do, I hope we do not unduly focus on one man, one political party, or even one country. Instead, our focus should be on the enduring fundamental principles of life that ennoble mankind. Ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, presidents have built libraries, and amidst the surroundings that have shaped their characters and molded their values. From West Branch, Iowa, to the Simi Valley of California, these institutions reflect the genius of the American people for self-government. Within their walls are housed millions of records for scholarly interpretation, along with thousands of objects that give both solid and symbolic substance to this nation's highest office, and to the 40 men who have occupied it since Washington took his oath. Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future. It is said that after leaving the White House, Harry Truman once came into his living room to discover his wife Bess tossing their old love letters into the fireplace. "Think of history," said a horrified Mr. Truman. "I have," said Bess. Well, in a few days, more than 6 million pages of documentation pertaining to my administration will be released to the public. In time, more than 50 million pages will be made available for researchers. But if the Reagan Library is anything like its counterparts, most of those who enter these doors will not be academics. No, they will be ordinary people of all ages, backgrounds, and political persuasions, eager to examine their past and explore a history not always learned in school. For them, a time capsule of American growth and greatness, covering more than a single presidency, honoring more than a single president. Here, visitors will have a chance to tour and study at their leisure the accelerating changes in a fast-forward world. They will be able to trace the historic process by which mankind, has stepped back from the narrow window ledge of mutually assured destruction. They will observe an American president and a Soviet leader sitting in a boathouse on the shore of Lake Geneva, striving to banish the nuclear nightmare from the dreams of all our children. They will see tears of pride from the boys of Pointe du Hoc. They will hear the trusting engines of Challenger lifting off on a heartbreaking final mission. They will be introduced to a warm and selfless First Lady who reached out to a generation of young Americans threatened by the scourge of drugs and who put a comforting arm around an older generation through the foster grandparents program. They'll catch the sinister crackle of a would-be assassin's weapon, one that forever changed the lives of Jim and Sarah Brady, while reconfirming my belief that whatever time remained to me was to be spent in service to the American people and in accord with the Lord's wishes. No doubt many visitors will stand in the replica of my Oval Office. Perhaps they will sense a little of the loneliness that comes with decision-making on a global scale, or the stabbing pain inflicted by a terrorist bomb half a world away, or the dread sound of a telephone in the middle of the night with news of hostile actions. They will also feel some of the immense pride that comes to any president in that office as he comes into daily contact with the American heroes whose faith in themselves, their mission, and their mandate is a never-ending source of emotional renewal. But then I was lucky. If I ever tired, all I had to do was look over my shoulder. Age has its privileges, and on this day of memory and reflection, I hope you will indulge me in recalling some very special people. I remember a small woman with auburn hair and unquenchable optimism. Her name was Nellie Reagan, and she believed with all her heart that there was no such thing as accidents in this life. Everything was part of God's plan. If something went wrong, you didn't wring your hands, you rolled up your sleeves. And I remember a storytelling salesman with the Irish gift of laughter and a certain American restlessness. In the spirit of his forebears, who had settled on the endless sea of grass that was the Illinois prairie before the turn of the century, Jack Reagan took his family to many new beginnings. Perhaps that was the root of my belief, shared with Thomas Paine, that we Americans of all people were uniquely equipped to begin the world over. Jack had dreams, Nellie had drive. The Reagans of Dixon, Illinois may have had a little in material terms, but we were emotionally wealthy beyond imagination, for we were Americans, young people in a young land with the best days ahead, and we were part of a very special extended family. I grew up in a town where everyone cared about one another because everyone knew one another, not as statistics in a government program, but as neighbors in need. Is that nostalgic? I don't think so. I think it is still what sets this nation apart from every other nation on the face of the earth. Our neighbors were never ashamed to kneel in prayer to their Maker, nor were they ever embarrassed to feel a lump in their throat when Old Glory passed by. No one in Dixon, Illinois ever burned a flag, and no one in Dixon would have tolerated it. Something else I learned, and that every generation of young Americans must discover for themselves. I learned to admire the entrepreneurial spirit of this pioneering land, where everyone has a chance to push out the boundaries of life. All this and more will greet visitors to this library and museum. If they're anything like me, they will arrive with the conviction so reminiscent of what Nellie Reagan taught long ago in Dixon, that America itself is no accident of geography or political science, but part of God's plan to preserve and extend the sacred fire of human liberty. I, too, have been described as an undying optimist. always seeing a glass half full when some see it as half empty. And yes, it's true. I always see the sunny side of life. And that's not just because I've been blessed by achieving so many of my dreams. My optimism comes not just from my strong faith in God, but from my strong and enduring faith in man. In my 80 years, I prefer to call that the 41st anniversary of my 39th birthday, I've seen what men can do for each other and do to each other. I've seen war and peace, feast and famine, depression and prosperity, sickness and health. I've seen the depths of suffering and the peaks of triumph. And I know in my heart that man is good, that what is right will always eventually triumph, and that there is purpose and worth to each and every life. A dynamic people, by rolling their sleeves up and getting government off their backs, can achieve economic renewal. They can slay the beast of inflation and break the record book when it comes to sustained economic growth. They can create millions of new jobs and show a watching world the success of free enterprise. I remember a time when the growth of American government seemed inexorable, and the encroachment of that government on the lives and liberties of our citizens seemed unstoppable. I also remember a time when America was advised to keep a low profile in the world, as if by hunkering down and muzzling her deepest beliefs, she might avoid foreign criticism and placate her enemies. And I remember a time when walls divided nations and human rights were trampled in the name of corrupt ideologies. A time when the arms race was spiraling out of control and distrust stood between us. 80 years is a long time to live. And yet within the course of only a few short years, I have seen the world turn upside down and conventional wisdom utterly disproved. Visitors to this mountaintop will see a great jagged chunk of that Berlin Wall, as you've been told already, hated symbol of, yes, an evil empire that spied on and lied to its citizens, denying them their freedom, their bread, even their faith. Well, today, that wall exists only in museums, souvenir collections, and the memories of a people no longer oppressed. It is also a reminder that a strong America is always desirable and necessary in our world. Today, a heroic people has cast off the chains of Marx and Lenin that gave rise to so much of this century's tensions. The Iron Curtain has rusted away. In churches and schools, in factories and on farms, the people of Eastern Europe have found their voice, and with it a battering ram to knock down the walls of tyranny. Totalitarianism is melting like snow. As the mythology of communism melts under the fierce heat of truth, our greatest enemy now may be complacency itself. Meanwhile, let us joyously invade our former opponents with Yankee ingenuity, entrepreneurs selling their wares, enthusiastic tourists, all spreading the gospel of human freedom. Prosperous democracies don't declare war on each other. They simply let their citizens build better lives for themselves. Western Europe soared like a phoenix from the ashes of World War II. So can Eastern Europe from the ruins of totalitarianism. And the American people can help show the way. What a happy challenge for those looking for something to do after the Cold War. Today is the latest chapter in a story that began a quarter century ago when the people of California entrusted me with the stewardship of their dreams. The latest, but far from the last. For 10 years after we summoned America to a new beginning, we are beginning still. Every day brings fresh challenges and opportunities to match. With each sunrise, we are reminded that millions of our citizens have yet to share in the abundance of American prosperity. Many languish in neighborhoods bereft of hope. Still others hesitate to venture out on the streets for fear of criminal violence. Can't we pledge ourselves to a new beginning for them? Around the world, hope stirs in the Middle East, and our prayers are with the peacemakers as they strive to realize an historic opportunity to bring peace to that ancient cradle of faith. With the Cold War over, can't we achieve a new beginning wherever peace is threatened? Proverbially, old men plant trees, even though they do not expect to see their fruition. Well, so it is with presidents. The doors of this library are open now, and all are welcome. The judgment of history is left to you, the people. I have no fears of that, for we have done our best, and so I say, come and learn from it. My fondest hope is that Americans will travel the road extending forward from the arch of experience, never forgetting our heroic origins, never failing to seek divine guidance as we march boldly, bravely into a future limited only by our capacity to dream. May every day be a new beginning, and every dawn bring us closer to that shining city upon a hill. Thank you. God bless you all, and God bless America.
President Ronald Reagan, the man for whom this library is named, the man for whom this library is a tribute, speaking to more than 4,000 invited guests at the dedication of his library.
And that is why he is called the great communicator. Linda, you spoke earlier about President Reagan and the fact that we haven't seen him for a while. Is there a reason why he's dropped out of sight? We've seen Nancy with the Just Say No campaign. Has President Reagan been up to something else?
Well, President Reagan has really scaled down his public appearances in the last year or so. There is some speculation that he is not feeling as well as he clearly appears to feel today. As you point out, that was a vintage Reagan speech full of all the optimistic images that made the nation feel so good about him when they elected him and re-elected him president in the 1980s. But clearly his health is fine. There was, of course, increased speculation when he did not attend the wedding of Elizabeth Taylor. There was some concern that he might be experiencing some kind of physical problems, but that, at least today, certainly appears not to be the case.
Indeed, Linda, has he not really been preoccupied with this library, with every detail? He and Mrs. Reagan apparently have spent a lot of time out there overseeing absolutely every detail of that library.
Well, they really feel an emotional attachment to this project in so many ways. Not only do they want to preserve his legacy in history, but they, of course, want to be buried here as well. The president has been out here taking people on tours, and it has taken up a great deal of his time. This clearly was a speech that will probably stand out as one of his best in recent years. Surely caused some frustration among the other former presidents on the podium, simply because in terms of his communication skills, it is hard to rival Ronald Reagan.
But indeed, each of the presidents spoke well, briefly, but very well. Some from notes, some clearly without notes. It appeared that President Nixon was speaking extemporaneously.
And President Nixon gave a very short speech. I think he spoke just a little bit over 5 minutes. All the Republican presidents, of course, praised all of Ronald Reagan's accomplishments at length. And Jimmy Carter, of course, pointed to domestic problems. Here are the keys now of the museum and the library being presented to the National Archivist. This thus passes control of this museum and library to the federal government, which again will spend about $1.5 million years or $1.5 million running this every year.
It's interesting looking at that crowd, Linda. Some were showing some signs of exhaustion, but indeed many of those people have been sitting in that bright California sun for several hours, having to arrive much earlier for obvious reasons, security.
Most of the men in the audience had removed their jackets, and in fact, a few of the first ladies up on the podium had done likewise.
Including Secretary of State Baker sitting there in his shirt sleeves.
Well, it's actually not as hot here as you might think. It's the winds have died down a little bit. Now, Lee Greenwood is singing the song that was the anthem of Ronald Reagan's campaign in 1984 at a time of high patriotism and national pride. It's "I'm Proud to Be an American," and Ronald Reagan played it at every campaign appearance, and it is clearly a personal favorite of his.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, and I won't right to me, and I'd gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
It was the feeling that was inspired by songs such as this that certainly brought many young people into the Ronald Reagan camp and has contributed to a conservative tide in the country, which has caused more and more Americans to identify themselves as Republicans, all due to Ronald Reagan and the themes of his campaigns.
But Jimmy Carter pointed out that patriotism is not the exclusive domain of the Republican Party. He also pointed out that he had a hand in helping to build up this nation's military, saying that it took several presidencies to achieve what had been achieved.
Interestingly enough, overall, Jimmy Carter presented a glowing tribute to President Reagan, as did the other presidents on the podium, although he did chide them a little bit for health care, homes for the homeless, education, a few domestic things.
Acknowledging that we still have problems to deal with.
Well, those are clearly going to be the themes of the Democratic campaigns against George Bush. It was George Bush, in fact, who praised Ronald Reagan's economic achievements because George Bush now is carrying out those very policies and will be judged on them as well. And as you point out, Jess, it is not widely remembered that Jimmy Carter did begin the defense buildup, which Ronald Reagan certainly escalated to historic proportions, tripling the defense budget. And this is an incredible sight. Flyby, which is almost at eye level with the stage.
We understand this is Strike Fighter Squadron number 25, and did you know where they're from, Jess?
From Lemoore.
This, by the way, this event was organized by Michael Bieber, the media strategist who guided Ronald Reagan's campaigns and media strategy through both campaigns, a controversial character, but an advertising and staging genius. And he's put this event together, and it has been meticulously organized and timed. Given all the security and the important personages who had the opportunity to speak at length, it really went off quite without a hitch and fairly well timed.
And indeed, Lou Wasserman, whom we saw seated on that podium today, also on that stage today, also had a good hand in this with the facility of MCA and Universal Studios, Universal Studio tour trams being used to take people up to the location.
And back.
Ronald Reagan had some good friends.
Well, and he was Ronald Reagan's agent back in the old Hollywood days, so naturally everything that Ronald Reagan has been able to do theatrically has been done with the highest quality of assistance from Hollywood. There has been some discussion about whether or not the cultural center, the Center for Intellectual Discussion that Ronald Reagan talked about in his speech just a little while ago, is ever actually going to come to be. When the library and museum were initially designed, one of the main focuses was going to be a center for seminars and discussions and a furthering of Ronald Reagan's conservative ideas. Followers of Ronald Reagan believed that they were part of a movement, and indeed they were, and the true believers still want to see that movement go forward. But at this point, it does appear that there are going to be financial problems, and there has been some complaint from conservatives that not nearly enough of the space here in the 153,000 square feet is going to be devoted to that seminar center.
That is going to be one of the problems, and access to presidential papers is critically important to scholars. There have been assurances, however, from Mr. Reagan's supporters that full access will be provided there. Many of the papers, of course, will not be available for another decade for security and privacy reasons as well.
I think a lot of people are probably looking to see some of the Iran-Contra papers, but again, those will not be available. And we should point out that the library itself opens tomorrow to people in the area. We understand that all of this week that people who live in Ventura County will be able to get in free. It opens to the public on Wednesday. See if I'm forgetting anything here. Open to the public on Wednesday. And should you decide to go, it's $2 if you do not live in Ventura County.
This has been an extraordinary day. The weather cooperated. 5 presidents there. Nothing quite like it. Thank you for joining.
This has been a special report from Channel 4 News. We now return to regular programming, The Jenny Jones Show, which is already in progress. Stay tuned for Another World at 1 o'clock, followed by Days of Our Lives at 2.